Come on in. All right, it is 12:02, so we are going to get started with our program. And very grateful to have you here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Matt Gross. I am the Director of Organizing and Faith Engagement with Bread for the World, and I want to welcome you to our WIC 101 Bread for the World policy briefing. I just want to give a short introduction here before I turn it over to an all-star team of folks that we have here to do some teaching and some presenting for us. Bread for the World, we don't have it here, but Bread for the World, our symbol is the table and a bowl. And that is because our mission calls us to come together around all kinds of tables with all kinds of people to advocate for an end to hunger, to advocate that all people should have enough food and the right kinds of food so that they can be nourished and flourish in their lives. That includes gathering around the table with people of power and people of influence. But we also gather around the table to learn, to listen, to learn, and to grow, to deepen our understanding, to challenge our assumptions, and to ask questions. And that is the spirit in which we've been pulling these policy briefing webinars together to give ourselves a chance to learn, to listen, to learn, and to ask questions. We've done a series of these over the last couple months. We've focused on SNAP, otherwise known as food stamps. We've focused on our international nutrition and global health priorities. And today we are turning our attention to another incredibly effective domestic nutrition program called the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infant, and Children, otherwise known as WIC. So we are turning our attention to that issue, and it's appropriate that we would do that because bread's history is intertwined with WIC. Last year, bread celebrated our 50th anniversary, and so did WIC. WIC was founded 50 years ago. You're going to learn more about that. And from the founding of Bread for the World, we have been involved in advocating for this program to strengthen it, to grow it, and to protect it. And so we are grateful to have the opportunity to pause for a bit and think not just about what's going on right now, but also about the history of this program and how it has impacted millions of women and children's lives. We're also going to talk a little bit about what's going on right now. And then certainly, as we do in every bread gathering, we are going to end with a call to action and also some time for Q&A. So please stick through the whole thing if you can. In a moment, I'm going to turn it over to our panel of experts. Sakina Shabazz is our interim director of the Policy Research Institute. Taylor Johnson is a domestic policy advisor with the Research Institute. And Charles Williams is our senior domestic policy advisor with our government relations team. They are all experts on these issues, and we're grateful to have them here to share with us. A couple of quick business items. First, the chat is disabled, so you won't be able to type in that, but I do want to call your attention to the Q&A tabs and also the resource tabs. And if you don't see them on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can probably click on the More button with 3 dots and you should see them in there. Feel free to, as we go, put your questions in the Q&A. We'll do our best to answer them as we roll along, but we'll also provide time at the end to make sure we cover them. And then we're also going to be throwing up resources in the resource tab. So we'll throw those up as we go through, so pay attention there and look for some good resources there. Finally, as I always say, do not feel like you need to be a policy expert on this. So we're going to throw a lot of information at you. You don't need to digest it all today. The point is to create a foundation for your advocacy. You need to be an expert on you, on why you care. So I'd encourage you to hold that question as we move through today's presentation. Why does this matter to you? Why do you care about it? Because that's centrally what's most important as we advocate. So with that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Sakina, to get us started.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate the introduction, and I am so thrilled that all of you are here with us this afternoon to learn more about the WIC program. So we have about an hour today, and I'll just give you a bit of a teaser for what we'll cover. I'm going to open us up with a bit of history on the WIC program itself, and then we'll transition into an overview of the program as it is ran today, a summary of the services, some of the outcomes that come from participating in the WIC program, and then we'll also get to talk about some of the funding structures that are really important for how Congress funds the WIC program. And that is an appropriate tie-in to our call to advocacy and our call to action, and to hopefully tee you all up with some next steps following this webinar. So I'm really excited to talk to you all about the history of WIC. As Matt mentioned, the program has been around for 50 years, but the origins of the program are really interesting and show us how we got to where we are today. WIC really was a seed of an idea with a doctor in Baltimore who noticed that there was a lack of nutritional access for mothers and babies and children. And the evolution of the program has really gotten us to the point where WIC is a national program operated in all 50 states, territories, and in some tribal nations, which we'll talk more about later. But to even get to the point where it is nationalized and supported with federal funding, WIC has always needed policy and political championship in Congress and at the ground level. And the story of the WIC program is inseparable from the advocacy that Bread for the World and others champion today. So that's a little bit of how we got here. But I want to take us back to the 1960s with Dr. David Page, who developed the concept of the WIC program in Baltimore, Maryland. Again, interfacing with pregnant mothers, postpartum mothers, babies, children, and really that full spectrum of life, and realizing that nutritional support and supplementation was critical for health at that time. The foundations of that research and the origins of the program caught national attention and allowed for an amendment to the Child Nutrition Act in 1966 that authorized the program at the federal level for 2 years. But at that point, it was not fully fledged and permanent. Along with that, going into the early 70s, we have the opening of the first WIC clinic in Pineville, Kentucky. Kentucky is a state of consequence for Bread's advocacy, is a really important state in the nation as a whole, and is also reflective of how WIC is accessed by people who live in rural areas, outside of metropolitan areas, and really reaching folks who are most proximate and have high need for that nutritional support during pregnancy, postpartum, and for infants and for children. So if anyone on the call today is from Kentucky or has a close relation to the state of Kentucky, I think you can feel a little bit of pride in knowing that the origins of this program in terms of how it reached the people come from the Bluegrass State, which is a big deal. In 1975, we see the permanent establishment of WIC as a national program, which means that more people who need this access are able to participate in it. And then going to jump about 20 or so years to the changing of the name to include nutrition in the title. It's not just about food on plates and making sure that people eat. The WIC program is designed to be a public health nutrition program, which means that there is emphasis on the nutritional quality of the food to ensure that the health of the mother and the infants and the children who are participating are prioritized, and that the foods available through the program really achieve maximal nutrition depending on the health of the recipient. It's not just about foods on plates, it's about making sure that it is also nutritious, and adjusting the name through Congress was a reflection of that value, which is really important. And then we're going to hop again to the 2010s. This is when we start to see the modernization of the WIC program. There might be folks on the call today who are familiar with WIC and how it operated with the coupon book, or maybe using some of the stamps in the grocery store aisle to get fortified cereals and different fruits that are nutritionally tailored to the WIC program. Around this 2010 period is when we start to see the emergence of the EBT card, or the electronic benefit transfer card. I think more folks would be familiar with that from the SNAP program, or as Matt mentioned earlier, formerly the food stamp program, where it's kind of like a credit or a debit card that you would use at the point of sale when checking out from the grocery store. That modernization effort was really, really important. One, from the experience of participants in the store for reducing stigma, and also integrating shopping for WIC as a regular part of one's visit to the grocery store. So those modernizations are really important part of the WIC history. And then, as was mentioned before, WIC is almost just as old as Bread for the World. Bread for the World is almost just as old as WIC, depending on how you want to look at it. That storied history of 5 decades of access to this program for mothers and children is so important. We celebrate that, but more importantly, we have to continue to advocate, to fund, and protect the program. With that, I'll turn it over to Taylor to talk about where we are currently with WIC.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sakina. My name is Taylor Johnson. As Matt said, I'm a domestic policy advisor within the Policy and Research Institute, and I have the privilege and the responsibility both today of kind of diving into the inner workings of how WIC operates today. And so you have that really kind of good baseline historical perspective of where it started, how it's progressed and changed. And I really want to give you all some really good knowledge around how WIC operates today, who it serves, how it works, and some of the perhaps lesser known services that this really important program provides. So to start, I think it's important for us to really define what WIC is. Hopefully you have some baseline knowledge. But if not, and as you saw on the title slide there, WIC is the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children. And you can see why we prefer to use the acronym. That is a mouthful to say each and every time. And that WIC acronym really comes from the people that the program is designed to serve: women, infants, and children. As Sakina said, it is a public health nutrition program that is administered and operated at the federal level. It's administered by USDA, and on the kind of the sub department under USDA is the Food and Nutrition Service, or FNS. This is the same agency within USDA that operates other really important federal nutrition programs like SNAP. And so we see a lot of that kind of administration, portfolio, and responsibility fall within FNS across many things, including WIC. State and local health departments actually help to implement or deliver the services. And so when we see health departments, and I'll show kind of like the linear progression of how these WIC benefits are administered and the services that are provided, when we think about health departments, I think a lot of us maybe in our minds think about HHS, or Health and Human Services. And it's important to know that they play an integral part, but program is really housed within, again, USDA and FNS. And it's a really good picture of how, an agency focused on agriculture and nutrition interfaces and works with agencies and departments that are focused really on health and outcomes. And I think it's a great picture of the tie between those topics. WIC operates in all 50 states, Washington, D.C., tribal nations, and U.S. territories. And then you see that last bullet on what WIC provides. We're going to dig into each of these sub-bullets a little bit more throughout the presentation. We see tailored food packages for participants. We see nutrition education, breastfeeding support, and other health referrals and services that I think sometimes fly under the radar and when we talk about the knowledge of what WIC does. So people who participate in WIC have access to all of these things. But what does that look like? Well, 41% of all babies born in the United States have parents who are using WIC to get that supplemental nutrition support. 41%. I want to let that sit for just a second. That is a large number. It's almost half of all the babies who are born in a year within the United States participate in this incredibly important program. As a whole, 6.7 million people participate in WIC on an average month. We generally tabulate WIC participation on a month-to-month basis, but as an average, if you kind of zoom out, look at a whole year, 6.7 million individuals are served by this really important program. To kind of put a bow on this section, I talked about this earlier, it starts with USDA in terms of the federal administration of it. State agencies get a little bit more granular in how dollars are distributed and spent and administered. And really, we see at the local health department level where participants are interfacing, having conversations with their clinicians or their care providers. And then ultimately, the participants are the ones who get these resources, get these services, and get these monetary benefits at the end of the day to help them, again, supplement their nutritional well being. So let's zoom in on the participant side of things. Who ultimately is eligible to receive these WIC benefits? Well, as the name would imply, pregnant women are a major group. Postpartum women, breastfeeding women, infants generally gauge up through 12 months, so the first year of life, children who are under the age of 5, and then guardians have the responsibility and the oversight of those children through the age of 5. We saw this really become an important component when the opioid epidemic was really kind of at the height. So think grandparents who, for whatever reason, due to the parents' absence or leaving the picture for a variety of reasons, now had to provide care for those children. They can apply to receive WIC benefits and service to make sure that those children, and in some cases, those guardians, have access. Like many of our social safety net programs in the United States, this is a means tested program, which means we want to make sure that you have an income that falls in line with the legislation that authorizes you to receive these benefits. And for WIC, that generally is 185% of the federal poverty level. It's also a component is nutritional risk. So we've talked about this before, and we're going to talk about this throughout the presentation, that this is a nutritional program. And we want to make sure that you have nutritional needs that this program can aid you in and can provide you that supplemental boost to make sure you're consuming the right nutrition specifically tailored to you. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. A piece that I also want to talk about is adjunctive eligibility. This is a really important piece in the policy space. And as Matt said, we're not expecting you to be policy experts, so you don't need to remember this exactly. But this component or provision really enables and broadens the spectrum of who is eligible to receive these benefits. So if you're already participating in a program like Medicaid or SNAP or TANF, which is the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, we automatically enroll you into eligibility for WIC. And that reduces kind of the hoops and burdens that potentially eligible participants would have to face. So if you've already jumped through the requirements for SNAP and Medicaid and to determine your eligibility from a financial standpoint, we also say, yeah, you're good to go in terms of participating in the WIC program. And that's a really important thing, again, for a lot of participants who are already participating in other programs. The final piece that I want to call out here is something that I think is particularly germane, not just to this program, but to the kind of the current conversation that's going on throughout the country. And that this is different. WIC operates in different terms than a lot of our other nutrition programs, in that it does not require federal citizenship for you to participate. So SNAP is a big topic of conversation when it comes to citizenship eligibility. If you attended our SNAP 101 webinar just last month, we talked about some of the changes that have been made to SNAP in terms of citizenship eligibility for the program. But WIC doesn't have those provisions in there. And so it makes it really accessible for folks who, depending on their immigration status, might need some supplemental nutrition, whether they are in the process of becoming a citizen or whatever their current immigration status might be. WIC does not have that particular requirement. And that's important to know as we talk about a couple of the ins and outs of the WIC program. So that's who's eligible. What do those folks receive when they participate in WIC? Well, one of the core functions, as we've talked about and we'll dive into a little bit further, is providing food packages and nutrition benefits. The folks who participate in WIC come from a myriad and a variety of backgrounds, and they all have different needs. You can think about the nutritional needs of a 3-year-old is going to be wildly different than the nutritional needs of the mother caring for that 3-year-old. And so there are tailored food packages, part of the WIC program, that provide the nutritional benefit to the participants. These packages are determined by the interfacing and interviews of the participants with their generally local health departments. Folks who are dietetics or dietitians, nutrition experts can say, we think you need these things based on our understanding of your health, what you currently have access to, and they can really prescribe a certain food package for that individual. And you see there some of the things that are generally included in those food packages. It really is a comprehensive and holistic approach to make sure that people have access to the food and nutrition that they need. And again, I want to highlight that tailored piece. This is not a catch-all program. We try to do our best, and I say we as the United States in administering this program, to make sure that you have access to the specific nutritional needs that you need. There were a couple of updates we saw in 2023 to those food packages. It expanded fruit and vegetable access. It made some changes to whole grain options to do a couple of things. One, to better align with our understanding of dietary guidelines and what a human body needs to flourish, as Matt said. And we also saw some changes to the cultural preferences. We understand, and folks who operate the program and administer the program understand that we come from different backgrounds. We come from different heritages and cultures. And so what you eat and what I might eat is likely to look different. And we tried to accommodate that from a policy perspective within the WIC program through those food package updates. We also saw the enhancement of something called the cash value benefit. This is a monthly cash value voucher. As Sakina talked about, that EBT provision. This is specifically for folks, WIC participants, to redeem for fresh produce at authorized retailers. At least at my local grocery store, you can see on the little tag the UPC code where it says this is SNAP eligible or WIC eligible. And so think about those things when we're going through, and think about if you can conjure up some of those things that might be eligible for WIC benefits. We've really placed an emphasis from a policy perspective on ensuring that folks have access to more fresh fruits and vegetables. One of the places that can really come in handy is farmers markets. I think this is, again, sometimes flies under the radar in terms of what we know about WIC, but WIC participants can redeem these vouchers at their farmers markets, in addition to their local retailer stores, whether that be their Kroger or their Walmart or their Aldi. This is a great way for folks to get a little bit more familiar with the kinds of produce that they're eating, support their local economies, get to know their local farmers. And I think, from my personal perspective, farmers markets are also a great space of community and having conversations and getting plugged in. So a couple of things there on the food package and nutrition. To showcase how important that aspect is, that nutrition is, I wanted to elevate a couple of stories just briefly. These come from the National WIC Association, and I want to start with Paige, who is a mom from South Carolina, and she talks about how her kid just loves bell peppers. And they aren't cheap. We've seen the cost of food prices go up, and these participants experience that as well. And so that cash value benefit likely enabled Paige to buy just a few more bell peppers for her kid. I also want to talk about Alyssa, who is a WIC mom in Oregon. And again, these were collected by the National WIC Association. Alyssa talked about being on the coast there, how important seafood is. So she might have been able to purchase at maybe a fish market, using those WIC benefits to purchase more probably locally caught, locally sustainable seafood for her family. And then Candace, an Illinois WIC mom who talked about that specific cash value benefit increase for fruits and veggies, and talked about how it allowed her to make sure that she could fuel her family because her infant likes to taste new fruits and vegetables, and her toddler loves grilled vegetables. As Matt said, hopefully it's springtime where you're at. If you're firing up the grill, great to put vegetables on the grill. And so this program enabled Paige, Alyssa, and Candace to have a more nutritionally balanced lifestyle and diet for both themselves and for the children that were participating in the program. I think these are great stories to highlight the food component, the nutritional component of WIC. But of course, WIC doesn't end simply at food. At its core, it is a nutritional public program, but it has comprehensive support built in as well. One of those things is breastfeeding support. And so we see peer-to-peer counseling and lactation consultation. There are support networks built in, and it is the largest single funder of breastfeeding support and education in the United States. We see nutrition education. So we enable you to purchase the foods and the fruits and vegetables and the produce that you need. And we also make sure that you're aware as a WIC participant of how that nutrition has an impact on your body and your children's body surrounding pregnancy and through those early stages of development in the child's life. Another really important component of WIC is that it has health referrals. So again, WIC participants are interfacing routinely with their local health departments and care providers. Those places are really good at getting people plugged into additional health resources that they need. They can't provide all the care in one single stop location in many points. And so kind of acting as that hub of making sure that you have access and referrals to make sure that you have the health that you need. And then again, we see community connection. So WIC clinics kind of act as community hubs. Think about 41% of babies are covered by WIC. That's a lot of people convening in one place throughout the month. And so can really act as that broader network of making sure that you are able to see and have conversations with other people who are participating in the WIC program. And all four of these things, plus the nutrition component, really combine into a public health program. It's a holistic approach that tries to get at each individual need, whether that's breastfeeding support or nutritional care or education or health referrals, or just having a place for you to come and have conversations and explore connections. This program achieves all of those things, and it does so really well. And the reason we know it does so really well is because there is a wide body of research that has articulated and demonstrated the outcomes of the folks who participate in the WIC program. And so when we talk about the outcomes, what does WIC participation achieve? Well, first and foremost, research has continually demonstrated that for participants who are in the WIC program, we generally see a lower preterm birth rate among those participants. And so when you think about the heightened and nutritional content and quality of a mother throughout the term of pregnancy, we see that translate into lower preterm birth rates. And we see increased birth weight of the infant at time of birth. We also see lower infant mortality rates. Research, again, has linked WIC enrollment to reduced infant and child mortality, especially in those early days of life. It starts in that prenatal period of the mother, but making sure that that infant, that very young child, has access to the nutritional components they need, reduces infant mortality rates. We see higher breastfeeding rates. There's been a wide body of research talking about some of the benefits of folks who breastfeed, and this support program does a really good job at increasing those breastfeeding rates among mothers and children. And ultimately, we see lower healthcare costs. We talk a lot sometimes in the policy space on what is the investment? What's the ROI? For every dollar invested in WIC, that generally it's estimated to save around $3 in Medicaid costs. If you remember back to that adjunctive eligibility piece, if you participate in Medicaid, you're likely eligible, you're already approved to participate in WIC from that income perspective. And so if you're taking advantage of both programs to make sure you are healthy as you can be, if we're investing dollars in WIC and you're utilizing those dollars, we're reducing the amount of money that is being expended through Medicaid. And that's a really important component. I want to jump back real quickly to the higher breastfeeding rate piece. I was talking to Sakina when preparing for this, and we thought this would be kind of a neat factoid, if you will. We see in WIC, they measure breastfeeding rates on the participants. The highest breastfeeding rates that we see, again, WIC operates in all 50 states and many of the territories, Virgin Islands, Texas, and American Samoa have the highest breastfeeding rates within the WIC program. So if you are ever in a trivia night and that comes up as a piece of trivia, feel free to pull that out and then write us and let us know that you use that and give us a little bit of credit. So just a really important demonstration that these are important outcomes that we achieved through WIC. And again, through all of those, it provides vital social and community support. The peer network piece is a really important component. I don't know how many, again, we can't see you. I don't know how many of you are parents or mothers, but I think we can all agree the importance of networks and community around these topics. And WIC is really kind of the marketplace for that to happen for a lot of participants. Of course, and we talked about 6.7 million people are served by WIC on an average month, and that costs money. For every dollar that we spend, it reduces our spending on Medicaid by $3, but that dollar has to come from somewhere. And so where does that come from? Well, WIC, unlike several other of our nutritional programs, is a discretionary program. SNAP is an entitlement program, which means you are, as an American citizen, entitled to participate in that program, and WIC is not. And the federal government has to offer up the money for SNAP, regardless of what that might be. WIC is discretionary, which means Congress every year, every appropriation cycle, has the discretion to provide funding for this program. When we talk about funding, we use the term full funding. And my colleague Charles, who Matt mentioned, is going to talk about this a little bit later on in terms of what Bread's ask around funding is going to be. But we generally say full funding for WIC. And that historically means that if everyone who is eligible, to the best of our knowledge as the country and as the USDA is administering this, if everyone who is eligible wants to participate, there are dollars and resources allocated and appropriated for them to participate. Historically, this has been a wide range. WIC has a long, history that we've talked about. In fiscal year 2026, that was at $8.2 billion for the year. And again, that $8.2 billion means that if every woman, infant, and child who wanted and was eligible to participate wanted to, they could. We had the money to make sure they had their nutritional access and resources to make sure that they had a life well lived throughout those first really sensitive years of life and after birth. And again, I want to reiterate, this is a commitment that Congress has to make annually. This is not something that is a foregone conclusion, and we're going to talk about that. Fortunately, WIC has a long bipartisan history. It has historically enjoyed strong support across both chambers, across the aisle, and it is seen as a core program to children's health. But because it's discretionary, it would be considered a risk. We can foresee a Congress that chooses not to fully fund WIC, which means people might be turned away. And the reason full funding is so important, and I've touched on this, so I won't spend too much time on this last bullet point, but we actually see a gap between those who are eligible to participate and those who actually participate. And there's been a lot of work within the WIC advocacy community to shrink that gap so that everyone who is eligible has access to these resources. And so let's say we make really good progress as advocates, as supporters of this program at shrinking that gap. We raise the participation rate within the WIC program. And let's say that happens in a year where Congress chooses not to fully fund WIC. There is going to likely be a funding shortfall. And so you've got people now who are expecting resources, but now are being told, we don't have the money to fully fund this program. And so that's why we always advocate for full funding for the WIC program to make sure that everyone who is eligible has access to these vital resources. Just really quick, I want to go through some of the other factors affecting WIC, and then I'll transition over to my colleague Charles, and we're going to leave you with a couple of asks as well and opportunities for action. We talked about that there is no citizenship component in the WIC program. We've actually seen kind of a change to that regard on the state level. There have been some states who offered up and piloted some legislation that would implement a requirement of citizenship on the state level, which kind of goes against the federal policy. We also saw in the most recent president's budgetary request a kind of back down of that full funding that we just talked about. There were some significant cuts to the cash value benefit, which again enables folks to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables. My colleague is going to talk about where that ultimately ended up, but we saw a little bit of pressure from the administration to not maybe consider full funding. Government shutdowns are factors that affect WIC. Once that money runs out, again, because it's discretionary, Congress has to appropriate new money. And if they don't, and we saw this recently in the last 43-day shutdown, that can have real consequences for participants. The dietary guidelines for Americans, or DGAs, those have an impact. Again, we tailor these nutritional priorities in these food packages to make sure that folks have access to the dietary needs to the best of our knowledge, to the best that research and science has demonstrated, that give people the best chance of having a healthy life. And so DGAs impact the WIC food packages. Grandparents and caregivers, which we talked about, especially through the opioid epidemic, have access to WIC, and so that has an impact as well. How do we gauge how many of those that there are when we try to figure out what full funding and full participation might look like? And another really important, we don't have time to dig into this today, but another really important component is disaster WIC. And so when we think about in times of disaster, whether that's a hurricane, a flood, a power outage, I actually live just outside of Kentucky, and several portions of Kentucky have been impacted by several natural disasters within years. And I can only imagine that the folks living in that area likely took advantage of disaster WIC in those times, in which they have a little bit more grace and leniency to have access to these benefits when refrigeration might not be guaranteed, when power might not be guaranteed, when your food has spoiled. And so I think these are a really important component. Again, we don't have time to get into all of that. I want to turn it over now to Charles to talk about what are we advocating for and what actions you can take.
Thank you, Taylor. I'm Charles Williams. I'm the Senior Domestic Policy Analyst for Bread for the World here in Washington, D.C. And I want to talk about WIC funding over the past year or so, where we are, and how we got here. As Sakina and Taylor highlighted, WIC funding has a long, proud bipartisan history. Congress has fully funded it every single year since 1997. But starting in fiscal year 2024, that streak was genuinely threatened for the first time in nearly 3 decades. So here's a short version of what happened. In the fall of 2023, new projections show WIC was heading towards a serious funding shortfall. Rising caseloads and food prices meant that the existing funding was simply not enough. An appropriation bill, which is basically bills that authorize agencies to spend money from the US Treasury, that would have slashed WIC by hundreds of millions of dollars, was introduced in the House. And it would have cut the fruit and veggie cash value benefit, as Taylor mentioned earlier, for moms and kids from up to $52 a month down to as little as $11. Now, for months, Congress funded the government only through short-term continuing resolutions that kept WIC running on the old inadequate level. Essentially, Congress kicked the can down the road. States were at real risk of having to turn eligible families away, something that had not happened in a generation. Now, Bread did not sit on the sidelines while all this happened. Our team covered the Hill and attended meetings. We wrote letters to House and Senate members. We joined coalition sign-on letters and endorsed key legislation to build the support that we needed. Bread advocates generated thousands of letters to Congress to ensure that key WIC decision makers heard from us in a meaningful way. Now, moving forward, in March 2024, Congress finally passed a 4-year fiscal year 2024 spending bill. It provided $7.03 billion for WIC, which was about $1 billion more than the prior year, enough at the time to serve every eligible family who sought benefits. The harmful cuts to the fruit and veggie benefit were also rejected. I want to be clear that this was a real hard-fought victory by Bread for the World and its partners. Moving forward to early 2025, Congress passed the fiscal year 2025 bill, again, fully funding WIC at $7.6 billion. When a 43-day government shutdown hit in the fall of 2025, WIC was briefly at risk of running out of money. And it had gotten so critical that the administration had to use tariff revenues just to keep the program running for a few weeks. Now, Congress ultimately passed a full-year fiscal year 2026 agriculture bill in November 2025 that provided $8.2 billion for WIC. That was the largest single year increase in recent memory. Now, the bottom line is this: WIC has been protected, and we have been able to strengthen it over the past 2 years or so, but it has taken relentless, sustained advocacy every single step of the way to make that happen, and we need to keep that going. Now, alongside the WIC funding fight, there's a parallel legislative priority we really need to talk about, and that's modernizing WIC itself. Now, during COVID, Congress allowed WIC participants to certify their eligibility remotely by phone or video rather than requiring in-person visits. That flexibility was a game changer. It removed huge barriers for working parents and families in rural areas and people who couldn't easily get to a WIC office. Two bipartisan bills that Bread for the World has endorsed would make that flexibility permanent. The MODERN WIC Act in the House, led by Representatives Fitzpatrick and Bonamici, will permanently allow remote certification and remote benefit issuance. And a partner bill, the 21st Century WIC Act in the Senate, led by Senators Marshall and Gillibrand, would do the same thing. Taken together, these bills would ensure families can enroll and maintain their WIC benefits without unnecessary barriers. Again, by phone, by video, without always having to show up in person. There is an urgent component here, and here's the urgency. The temporary authority that currently allows that remote certification expires on September 30th of this year. So if Congress does not act before that deadline, families across the country will lose the ability to certify virtually, and that means lower enrollment, more families going hungry, and possibly falling through the cracks. We need to pass this legislation now. So with all that being said, where does that bring us today? And what are we doing about it here at Bread for the World? Well, right now, we are in the fiscal year 2027 appropriation cycle. The funding secured in November 2025 runs through September 30th of this year. So that means we need to be building the case for WIC's fiscal year 2027 funding right now, before the budget process locks in. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what Bread for the World's current strategy looks like on the Hill. Number one, building Hill support is our first priority. For example, this upcoming week, we are hosting a policy briefing here at Bread headquarters with our coalition partners, bringing together advocates and Hill staffers and allies specifically to educate and build more champions for WIC funding. The goal here is to walk away with more members of Congress who are ready to be vocal advocates when the appropriations debate heats up. Number two, we're going to continue to build relationships, specifically committee relationships, because relationships on Capitol Hill are everything. The Senate Appropriations Committee, especially the Agriculture Subcommittee, will largely determine whether WIC gets the funding it needs in fiscal year 2027. We have been making targeted asks of those members, and we are working to ensure that the voices they hear loudest are voices saying, fully fund WIC. The Senate historically had been more reliable on this, and so we do not want to take that for granted. Number three, we need more co-sponsors and leadership on the MODERN WIC Act and the 21st Century WIC Act. These are bipartisan bills. That's a strength, but we need more members publicly on record. Every new co-sponsor signals that this is the priority, and it increases the odds of floor action and of the bill passing into law. Lastly, but certainly not least, stories. Real stories are our most powerful tool. In Washington, D.C. and in state capitals, we are bringing the voices of real WIC families to legislators. Data and policy arguments open doors, and they're great. But a mother describing how WIC got her through a difficult pregnancy, that's what moves a legislator from, I support this to I will fight for this. And that's a huge distinction. Our state level advocacy creates a pipeline of those stories and builds constituent pressure that members of Congress feel back home. And they remember that when they're here in DC. So listen, we are fully aware of the political environment. It's challenging, but WIC has something that most programs do not. It's a genuine, durable bipartisan policy. It has genuine, durable bipartisan support. Republicans and Democrats on the Hill have voted to protect WIC again and again, and our job is to activate that support before the pressure of the budget fight makes it harder to do. With that, I want to send it back over to Matt Gross to close us out. Thank you all.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Sakina, and thank you, Taylor. Wow, I hope I'm guessing you guys are full, and I hope you feel full and nourished with all that great information and that deep dive into to WIC. So I want to focus now just a minute on what Charles was starting to dip into, and that's the call to action. This wouldn't be Bread for the World, Bread for the World webinar if we did not have a clear call to action. It's not just about the information, it's about how we turn that into action. I want to run through these, and then I want to turn it over and spend some time with some questions. So before I do that, just take a look at the Q&A tab because there's a good conversation going on there with a lot of questions being answered, and some of them we will speak to as well. So 3 things you can do right now, right? And the first one is our offering of letters, and that is a little bit of a longer view, but we want to ask you if you have not made a commitment to do an offering of letters. I want to invite you to scan the QR code. I'm not going to get into what an offering of letters is right now, but it is a tool to engage your whole congregation or your whole campus or your whole community. So I want to invite you to do that, use that QR code to make a pledge. If you've already made a pledge, if you're already receiving our emails that's giving you advice about how to do the OL, then I want to urge you to get that done. I want to urge you to do your OL as soon as you can and to deliver those offerings of letters to your local office. Make it a conversation about WIC. Use what you've heard here today. So make a pledge, get that OL done. The second action you can take, and I want to urge you to take it right now, and I want to challenge you to invite at least 5 people in your network to join you in doing it. But scan the second QR code. That's going to take you to the website of the National WIC Association. They are our key partner, and we follow their lead in terms of the legislative strategy on the Hill around WIC. That'll take you to an action alert that that lifts up the 2 processes that Charles was speaking to. We're at a moment of urgency because we are pushing the appropriations process, the funding process to fund work, WIC, and we are also trying to get this piece of legislation, the MODERN WIC Act, the 21st Century WIC Act. We're trying to get it passed, and we're trying to pass it through the appropriations process. That's a unique strategy, frankly, based on the dysfunction of Congress right now. And so it's really important that we right now tell our members of Congress, fund WIC and pass this bill in appropriations right now. And if you have a member of Congress who is a part of the Appropriations Committee, we can help you find that, whether that's the Senate Appropriations or House Appropriations. Those members of Congress are particularly important, but everybody needs to hear this message. So scan that code, use the Modern WIC Act action alert. You can personalize their email. It's a little bit different system. You have to hit a edit button, but we urge you to personalize that email. Tell them you're a member of Bread for the World. Tell them you're connected to a church or a school or community. Tell them why you care about WIC. So do that now and commit to share that action alert with 5 people in your network. The final one is Charles articulated it. Share a WIC story. Maybe you have one personally. Maybe you've benefited. We've all heard our president, Eugene Cho, talk very eloquently about how he and his wife, Minhee, benefited from the WIC program at one point in their lives. Many of us have. If you personally, or maybe you know somebody in the pantry that you volunteer at, or in your school or network, and you want to lift up their story, perhaps without using their name or with their permission, let us know. Reach out to a bread organizer. We'd love to hear more about that. We'd love to help document that and see if it might be appropriate to use or to invite that person to share their story. Take those three actions: commit to an OL, pass the MODERN WIC Act, share a story, and do those now. So thank you for all of that action and all that you do. I want to turn now and jump into some of the questions because there's a lot of great questions going on here. And I want to invite you to go in there and read them and read the responses because it's a great conversation. I'm going to start with two of the questions that we haven't answered yet and ask my colleagues to speak to them. The first one is from Pastor Paul Tice. Hey, Paul, how are you? He asks, according to the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, only 66% of eligible people in the state of California where he lives were signed up for SNAP in 2020. The bottom five states in terms of SNAP update by those who are eligible, and he contrasts that to Oregon, who has a rate of 100%. He's essentially asking, how can we help to increase participation in programs like WIC? So I want to invite my team to respond to that. I do know one thing we can say is advocacy to ensure this program is fully funded, as Taylor talked about and Charles did, is part of the key. Because if we increase the number of people eligible, we want to make sure we've got full funding available for them to receive benefits. So our federal advocacy, in a sense, is helpful there, but I know there's more we can do. So I'll turn it over to you. I don't know if it's Taylor, Sakina. Yeah, Sakina.
I'll take that first question. That's a really great one. Definitely want to echo the sentiment that we should be working with our elected leaders in Congress to make sure that they vote to fully fund WIC. Fully funding WIC means that anybody who applies for benefits and are eligible can receive them. So whenever our ask, for example, is $8.2 billion to Congress or $8.5 billion to Congress, that is the number that makes it so that anyone who applies and is eligible can receive services. So we need that first and foremost. One of the important aspects of WIC too is trusted messengers. People need to know about the WIC program. And so a lot of that peer-to-peer counseling and networking is really important. So if there are opportunities to support your local WIC clinic, if there are opportunities to table and to promote WIC participation at community gatherings or at health centers, organizations that have those community ties are really important for uplifting the messaging around WIC and to also remind people of their eligibility. Being pregnant, postpartum, breastfeeding, having children who are infants up through age 5. In a place like California, messaging around immigration status is also very important, and lowering that barrier to entry and that fear-based messaging as well is really, really important. And then the other things that I would add to that too is just promoting WIC within your community and other places where you are able to access folks who are available. Our faith-based networks, our churches and more are really important trusted messengers for WIC and making sure that people know that they have access. I think that's good for the time being. What's our next question, Matt?
Thanks, Kina. Yeah, how about, and Charles just answer this one. This is from Beth DeHaven. I think Beth's in Missouri. Hey, Beth. And she's asking about how SNAP benefits and WIC benefits are actually received and implemented.
Yeah,
Are they both through an EBT card or what does
yeah.
that look like?
It's a great question, and it confuses a lot of people because they sound so similar, but they work differently. So SNAP and WIC are separate programs. If someone qualifies for both, they usually have two different cards, essentially. SNAP is simple. It's a monthly dollar amount loaded onto a card that works like a debit card at grocery stores. WIC also uses a card in most states, but it is not like a lump sum of money. It's a set list of specific foods like milk, eggs, cereal, formula based on nutritional needs, plus a small cash value benefit for fruits and veggies that works more like flexible dollars. The way that WIC is delivered is it's a two-step process. First, participants, they're certified through a clinic or health provider, and then they're assigned a food package. Then they go to a grocery store to redeem those benefits, and the card only covers those approved items. So the easiest way to think about it is a SNAP is like a flexible grocery budget, while WIC is more of a prescribed nutrition package with little flexibility for like produce. I hope that
That's great.
answers.
Thanks, Charles. And that
Yeah.
answers another question that was in there. And the cash value benefit is something important to pay attention to. It's a wonky name, like all these things, but it's fruits and vegetables, and it's also been something that has really been in the crosshairs of elected leaders in terms of trying to cut in the last year. So it's something we really want to pay attention to in our advocacy and be able to speak to the importance of. I'll throw this one at Taylor. Taylor, maybe you could talk about Mary Claire asked, you said right up at the top, 41% of babies are touched by this program. She's asking, does that mean 41% of parents in this country are also at 185% of poverty level? And maybe you could speak to that and to the fluidity of being of poverty too.
Yeah, it's a great question and great clarification. I'll try to succinctly, kind of provide some clarity here. I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that adjunctive eligibility piece. And so folks who are participating in Medicaid are automatically eligible to participate in WIC from that income perspective. An important qualifier there is that Medicaid has a different income test in terms of eligibility than WIC does. And it really kind of is a sliding scale almost on the size of the household, the size of the family. And so it's not always a one-to-one ratio between those two. And so that's definitely a contributor to that 41%. We also think about, the federal poverty level itself is a sliding scale in terms of how many people you have in the household. And so kind of is again, as you said, Matt, a very fluid situation where just because you are below the FPL at one point doesn't mean you will be the next time you have birth. And so it's really, there's a lot of different kind of streams of how folks can participate in the WIC program. So short answer, no, for not all babies in the WIC program are below that 185% because of the fluidity, but also because of the streams that people have access to take advantage of WIC benefits.
Great. And we're about at time, but I want to try to ask you guys to speak to two more points because I think they're both really relevant in our advocacy now. We answered these questions, but I can throw it to Taylor, but whoever, on the immigration side, could you, because that's such obviously a hot, and unfortunate focus right now, frankly. Could somebody talk a little bit about why that's important? Why it's important that WIC is a model program and that it doesn't screen for status, and why that's so threatening now that we're starting to see states start to undo that. Talk about why that's important.
Matt, I'm happy to take that question. I think it's really important to know that in the design of WIC, as it exists in federal statute, screening for immigration status is not a requirement. There are other programs like SNAP, where screening for immigration status is a requirement. Temporary assistance for needy families or cash assistance, that is a requirement. Same for Medicaid, that is also a requirement. The WIC program in its design does not require that. As such, states, when they're working with their Department of Health to screen and enroll people, they are not required to do that because the federal government does not require them to do that. That direction really flows downward from the federal government to the state government to the local department, and that's the guidance that they follow. At a bigger
Could
level,
you the
sorry.
question though, I think it'd be good. Why
Yeah.
is that valuable? Why is it a good thing? How does that
So
help?
certainly, when we think about this from a public health perspective,
Yeah, there you go.
when all of us around us are healthy, the lowest among us or those who need the most help can also be supported and be healthy. When we think about mothers and children as sort of the backbone of many a community, many a family, many a society that we are in, it really reflects the value of protecting the most vulnerable among us. And I would put mothers and children in that category. And not screening for immigration kind of creates the widest base of eligibility for this program so that more people can be in it and not be deterred from participation. We also know that when someone doesn't have access to health insurance or to Medicaid or other programs that are protective, they can often end up in the emergency room where costs are driven up for states and for the federal government. If your health is taken care of in infancy and in pregnancy, you are less likely to be unhealthy and to need other emergency interventions. And so, from that public health perspective, it's about ensuring the most highest health at the earliest stage from a preventative perspective. And that really is one of those important features that not screening for immigration status can help achieve for this program and for mothers and children. But most importantly, it comes from the federal government. And so that's the standard, and that's what most states have to adhere to. That's what states are expected to adhere to.
That's great. So helpful. Thank you. And I think that's one thing we can, as we see states start to undo that, that's one thing all of you can help. If you're hearing about legislation in your state, we'd love to hear it. I know the National WIC Association has asked for help to know early if we see legislation that could be harmful to undoing that mandate. We'll go out on this, and maybe it's a good one for Charles. Just could you, because I think it's just top of mind for our advocacy, tell us again very succinctly how WIC is funded and why it's so important that we talk about it every year. Every year.
Yeah, it's funded by the appropriations process, and the appropriations process happens every year. It's essentially how the government decides how much money gets pulled out of the U.S. Treasury for specific programs. It's very important that the needs for folks in the WIC program are always highlighted. Members of Congress prioritize each request that they get from their constituency and their fellow colleagues on the Hill. So the more you talk about the importance of programs like WIC, it takes more of a priority for each specific member of Congress. It's not a guarantee that these programs are going to be funded. So your voices are more important than ever as we see rises in food costs and other items across the nation like gas or energy or anything else in that space. It's so important to ensure that programs actually help keep food on the table, especially for women and their children in their first 1,000 days of their life, which is the most important, are kept at top of mind. And so your voices are so important. Your advocacy is so important. And by the way, I'll just mention, Matt, when we talked about that $8.2 billion being the biggest increase in recent memory, that was all because of advocacy. That was because of, OLs and going to these offices. Um, there's nothing magical about this. It's putting your nose to the grindstone and actually advocating. I think that's so important for Bread for the World and their advocates. So please, please, please reach out to your elected leaders. Your voices are the only ones that matter.
That's great, Charles. That's a great thing to close on. It's a good reminder that in a challenging, is an understatement but in a challenging year, WIC has been a bright spot. And not that there aren't some challenges there as well, but the advocacy that we've done in partnership with the WIC Association and many others, that we have kept this program fully funded. And now we've got more work to do. So thanks to this team, thanks to Sakina, thanks to Taylor, thanks to Charles, thanks to each of you. We're available and look forward to partnering on our advocacy. So have a great day, everybody. Peace.